And that's the final presentation of this year's symposium, and it's from Alicia Marrs, and she's going to tell us about the organization that she's representing today, which is the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative, and she's going to let us know what we can do to get involved with lamprey conservation. Go ahead, Alicia.
All right, I'm just switching screens here. Sorry. Usually I'm the one doing this, so it's a little different. Okay. So while I'm getting this set up, thank you again to Jessica and everyone for inviting us to participate here. It's the wrong screen, so we will pop this baby up. And swap. Okay, does that look right?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So thanks again for inviting us. We are really excited to be part of the Mat-Su Salmon and Science Symposium, and also to be collaborating more with our fellow fish habitat partnerships in Alaska. So I'm going to touch on this really quickly. I know that Ted and Jessica already did, but PLCI is one of the most recent addition to NFHP's network of fish habitat partnerships. Sorry, it's very. So we are one of 6 Alaska FHPs, and recently the 6 of us have been getting together more and more, at least now that we're part of it, it seems more and more to me, to collaborate and find opportunities to really leverage our resources in support of restoring, conserving, and just enhancing fish habitat and the species that depend on it and the people in Alaska. And it's been a really great opportunity to learn more about what you guys are all doing, but also for us to impart our knowledge and importance of lamprey, and hopefully for us to also be gathering more information on lamprey in Alaska. As you know, Christina and Trent both mentioned, that's one of the things, not just the lack of awareness, but also just our lack of knowledge of distribution of lamprey in Alaska, that we're really hoping to fill those gaps. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the formation of PLCI, and one of the really the primary foundation for PLCI was really driven by the cultural importance of lamprey. So the tribes, especially in the Columbia River Basin, were really pivotal for shining a light on the diminishing population status in that region, but also because these are really, as Christina mentioned, and Trent, you know, a traditional first food like salmon have been used for medicinal uses, and they continue to be harvested both in the lower 48 and Alaska, as Trent mentioned as well. So the concern from the tribes really drove the push for an initial listing for lamprey, and then also for the ultimate creation of restoration plans after that. So in the 90s, that's really when the interest and the push for listing lampreys alongside other anadromous fish started. In that time, a lamprey technical work group was established in the Columbia River Basin, but that's since expanded and covers all of the western states that cover the historical range of Pacific lamprey, and that's PLCI's geographic distribution as well. That listing, unfortunately, was not successful. The petition was for 4 species of lamprey. You see them there: the Pacific, Western River, Western Brook, and the Kern Brook. And so the decision was that the listing was not warranted for all 4 of those species, for insufficient information for the first 3, Western Brook, Kern Brook, and River. And then for Pacific lamprey, while they agreed that the populations were rapidly declining, there was no definable distinct population segment. So as Christina mentioned, Pacific lamprey don't rehome to their natal streams. And so that really made it difficult to identify those distinct population segments, and thus they couldn't be listed in the traditional ways that under the ESA. And so that didn't mean that the folks that were pushing, you know, the environmental organizations, the tribes, the feds, the states that were really, you know, shining the light on the importance of this declining populations didn't give up, and they initiated collaborative efforts in order to conserve Pacific lamprey outside of the ECA. And through that, ESA, PLCI was born. So PLCI is essentially a collaborative initiative of Native American tribes, federal, state, local agencies, nonprofits, environmental organizations from across the West that are working together to conserve Pacific lamprey, both for their ecological importance, but also for their tribal cultural use. And so you'll see we've grown substantially. We have 176 partners across the 5 states, some in Alaska as well, 33 signatories to the conservation agreement, which is really one of the guiding principles of PLCI and something we're working on renewing for next year that I'll talk about in a little bit. And we're divided into 18 regional management units, and that's based on those population segments. And I'll talk about that as well. And so the 3 pillars that really help sustain the initiative are an assessment, the conservation agreement, and regional implementation plans. I've been watching all day, not talking all day. And those were, Trent alluded to those as well earlier, the RIPs. So the assessment is really an effort for us to understand more about the habitat condition, the population, demographics, the distribution, and the threats to Pacific lamprey across the range. And we do that every 5 years. And 2022 is a big year for us, and we're doing it again. And we're hoping that during that time, we're going to learn more about all of this in Alaska. Same thing with the conservation agreement. As I mentioned, we're updating that. It was first signed in 2012, and that's just a voluntary agreement to collaborate to implement these conservation measures in support of Pacific lamprey. So again, and you're going to hear this a few times, this is another opportunity for your organizations and agencies to sign on to the conservation agreement this next year to join us in this effort. And then the doers here are the regional management units that I talked about before. And so they help us guide and implement the conservation actions on the ground and really serve as a collaborative opportunity for stakeholders in each of these regions. So here's a map of the regional management units that we have. There's 18 of them. And you'll see Alaska is one of them, and so is the North Pacific Ocean. So those are 2 that might be particularly relevant to this group. And they're really made up of local biologists and managers. They're open to really almost anybody that's interested with and has local knowledge of the region and can help shine a light on, where Pacific lamprey may be and what conservation actions could be implemented to support them. And I saw some of the chats popping up here. There's already some local intel that's being shared, and that's really great. And one of the primary reasons we were really hoping to be able to be here today. Each of these regional management units gets together each year to discuss all of this and then update those regional implementation plans. And they're identifying risks, restoration actions, talking about ways to collaborate on projects. And as Trent mentioned, there is funding available, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then just share information and resources. And we understand, as PLCI was formed initially, those other regional management units down south, they were in a similar situation where there was a lot of focus on salmonids and salmonid restoration and not as much knowledge about lampreys in those regions. And it really evolved to have a lot more information and enthusiasm. And so we're hoping to see the same thing happen in Alaska. And not to keep throwing Trent under the bus here, but he and Sabrina are the leads for the Alaska RMU. And so they're the ones you should contact. But if you want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to connect you up as well if you want to participate. So the assessment that we're launching into for the 3rd time this next year, and we've just kicked off the planning for that, is really our effort to characterize the conservation risk of Pacific lamprey across their range. So you can see, even during the last assessment, there's areas in Washington in particular that we really don't know a lot about the distribution and status of lamprey. So it's really exciting for us to be filling in those gaps. And this is a time where we utilize the RMUs and the stakeholders within them to really drive our information collection and fill in the information gaps. We utilize the NatureServe model to create these rankings. And it's an exciting time to find out both where they are and, if there are instances likely where they've diminished in population and distribution, that's important for us to know as well. So again, we encourage you to participate if you're willing. Too far. So the regional implementation plans are also informed by those regional management unit meetings. And so they are, this is the RIP that Trent was alluding to in his presentation. And they're a way for us to have a document that really outlines the threats, the current status, and implementation measures that can be done in order to help conserve Pacific lampreys. So each year these get updated. They're on PLCI's website, and they're really useful documents for us as we guide not just how we go about this, but developing projects. It's useful for other funders and other stakeholders as well. So another kind of going back to the timeline and the history and the conservation agreement, every 5 years, as I've mentioned, it's big time for us. And so as we're getting into 2022, Lamprey Summit 5 is on the horizon for next December, and we're really hoping that we are going to see each other in person. But you'll see all the big steps that have come with each of the other summits over the years. And really the cornerstone of what we're going to be doing next December is signing on to that revised conservation agreement. We'll be presenting the findings from the assessment from this last year. And hopefully this will also be happening in conjunction with our in-person lamprey information exchange. So that will be, it's going to be, it'll be in Portland or Vancouver, Washington, Portland, Oregon. We're still working on locations and all of those things that are going to happen, hopefully, with meeting in person. But we do really hope that some of you can join us there, either virtually or in person. And so here's just a screenshot of the current parties to the conservation agreement. You'll see we do have some Alaska Department of Fish and Game is represented here. There's many tribal organizations, federal agencies, all coming together in support of conserving Pacific lamprey. So we've talked about funding, and one of the reasons, I know this isn't a very exciting slide, and those of you that are really familiar with the Mat-Su Fish Habitat Partnerships funding processes, this is nothing new to you, but we do want to just plug the fact that, you know, we're coming from a very similar pot of money in terms of what project funding we have available for Alaska. And now that PLCI has been an established fish habitat partnership under NFHP, we do have project funds. We had to wait a couple of years till they trusted us, I guess, enough to let us have those project funds. But we're full-fledged, but our funding cycle right now is a little off. The projects that we had submitted this last summer are going to be going into the FY23 cycle that Jessica talked about for Mat-Su earlier, where those proposals are being submitted in January. But ours are going to be developed in this next year, kind of in conjunction with the assessment and the RIP process. We're hoping that those will help inform the needed projects for next year. And so this gives you running start to be thinking about collaborative opportunities. And we encourage you to talk to Trent and Sabrina and Katie about project ideas where we can really leverage the local knowledge and expertise with all of you to support projects that can help us better understand distribution and the status of Pacific lamprey and the awareness. So, you know, we have this NFHP funding that's available for projects in Alaska, but we also, we keep projects and proposals close at hand that are submitted, even if we aren't able to identify funding pots for them right away. Often we have been able to fund projects through end of year funding that comes about from various federal agencies. So they come to us when they have some extra money, and we've been able to really successfully fund projects through that way as well. So here's a quick screenshot of the projects that we've funded in the past, and you see the dead lamprey in Willow Creek that this is pulled from Trent and Sabrina's proposal from last year, but we're really, really excited to be able to be funding and supporting this project moving forward. So real quick here, some other ways you can get involved. We have a technical work group, and that's kind of the technical advisory committee of PLCI. The next meeting is coming up here in December. It's a huge group with about 175 people. Christina's the chair. These are all the subgroups within it. And so if you're interested in anything in particular, you're more than welcome to participate in most of these groups meet quarterly, some monthly. And it's just a great way to learn more. You can email that information or that info@pacificlamprey.org to get involved, or just contact me directly and I can hook you up. And here's some of the recent publications that have come out. I'm not going to go through all of them because I actually have 2 slides, but I'm just going to encourage you. We have 2 places that you can find them, both on our website, which you see there below, and then also on the PLCI Data Clearinghouse, which the link is right here. Finally, coming up this year is Lamprey Week 2021, and we have virtual meetings every single day, December 6th through the 10th. The first day, Monday, is a kickoff of our policy committee meeting. So that's where the business is done for the year. And then the next day, in lieu of having our in-person information exchange, we are doing a series of virtual events during that week that will kick off our webinar series that we hosted last year. So you'll see them here. The first is celebrating the historical and cultural significance of lamprey, and we're going to have a lamprey paleontologist as well as some tribal keynote speakers, which will be really great. And then the technical work group will be meeting from 11 to 1. These are all Pacific time, I should say. So think 10 to 12 Alaska time. And then lampreys around the world will have some international speakers, and lampreys are Kahoot. We'll have some fun on Friday and play some virtual trivia. And finally, we are continuing our information exchange. So this is our monthly webinar series, the second Tuesday of every month, again, 11 to 1 Pacific, so 10 to 12 Alaska. And you can actually go and see the recordings from last year's webinars. We had between 150 and 250 people at each of those webinars last year, which was great. And folks continue to view them online. So we encourage you to join us for those as well. And I think that's it. And here's all of our contact information. So please feel free to reach out.
All right, thank you, Alicia, for filling us in on the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative. Grant tells me we can go a little long if we need to, so we have about a minute. I don't see any questions specifically coming in, though, but there's a lot of chat about places where people have seen lampreys, if anyone wants to check that out. And I will point out to Trent, I'll be following up with you. We encounter spawning lamprey pretty regularly in the Deshka, so I have a little info. I'll email you soon about that. So if there are no questions for Alicia, here's one from Andrew K. Can you enumerate lamprey with sonar?
I'm going to put that to Trent and Christina.
Does any other panelists still on want to take that?
I'm not sure. I've not done that. I mean, I think potentially it could be done if the resolution was good enough. I'm sure that using like Didson or something like that, or Eris, maybe the resolution is high enough. If you have them in a confined space, it could be done. So possibly, yeah.
Sabrina's chatting in. That's been done under the ice in the Yukon in the early 2000s. So that, I guess that answers the question. Yeah, and with that, we are exactly out of time. So yeah, I will again thank all of our speakers, and the lamprey stuff has been super interesting, and I'm glad you guys rallied to get involved with the symposium this year. And I'm gonna turn it back to Ted Eichscheid for some closing remarks, and I'm gonna take off and go round up my kids. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.